Awesome. So we are now being recorded, I believe. And let's see, let's go over some logistics. The tour homework is due still 2 weeks from now, but you'll probably need all the bandwidth you can get for the material that we're doing right now, because Signal's protocol is complicated. It seems complicated at first, at least, and then once you've spent a few times going back to it and trying to think about why it's giving us the properties that it is giving us, then it clicks eventually. So you'll need all the bandwidth that you can get to follow this material. Should I close the blind slightly? It's hard to see the board, right? I'll do that. This one. Awesome. Thank you. All right. So yeah, Signal is like the hardest part of the class according to everybody who took the class last year. So make of that what you will, but I'll try my best to make it as simple as possible. We'll break it down into many pieces and we'll talk about each of the pieces individually. The weekly questions will also be reviewed late this week. We didn't have a chance to go over them this weekend since Gabe isn't here, but we'll try to get that done with the next set of weekly questions probably. And right, Gabe mentioned this last time, if you need accommodations for the exam, even if you messaged him early in the semester, if you could just message him again, that would be great. We'll get all of that set up for you. Right, logistics are done. Let's start with reviewing encrypted email. So we can go over, this is something that we already covered way back, right? We did some PGP and we did encrypted email to go with that. So we've got the public information. So one of the things I'm going to stress right now is the keys. I'm really going to stress where the keys are, right? So for example, with encrypted email, we have each party has a pair of keys, right? Alice has got her keys, Bob has got his keys. And one of these keys is available to everyone, right? Not all the keys are available to everyone, that would be bad. The public keys are available to everyone. The secret keys, importantly, are known only to Alice and Bob. Now, that's very important, and I'm sure you guys are getting a grasp of that at this point. But another thing that, like another added layer of complexity, is the fact that these secret keys, after we have a compromise, then they're known to the adversary, right? So once we have, say, an attacker compromise Alice, then both these keys will be known to the adversary, and that makes things more difficult because now anything that uses the secret key here that expects security for people that don't know the secret key, that's not going to be compromised. And that comes up when you're messaging, right? Because you don't want that once you get compromised, say somebody compromises your phone for 5 minutes, you don't want them for the rest of your lifetime to be able to see your messages, right? Or even the rest of the month, right? That would be, ideally we would prevent that. So that's one of the things we'll be focusing on. And that's kind of the key thing that's going on with the secure messaging protocol that we're going to see later. But getting back to encrypted email, we had Alice essentially, uses Bob's public key to encrypt a message to him. And then she uses her own secret key to sign that message that Bob can then verify using her public key, right? And this is essentially how encrypted email is working. Does that make sense? So I've written out some of the details here, but the details are not important, right? There's some symmetric, asymmetric stuff going on, but that's more because symmetric encryption is more efficient. The key thing that's happening is Bob's public key is known to Alice, right? This thing is known to Alice, and Alice is going to, encrypt in such a way that Bob can decrypt it using his secret key. And then Alice's public key is known to Bob, so she's going to sign using her secret key, and that's going to help Bob to authenticate the message. Note specifically that these keys are long-term, right? They're long-lived. There's no way, if these keys could be updated within the messages, then that would be a problem because then an attacker could simply just say, oh, I updated my key. Here's my new key. Just use this to talk to me. And we don't want that. We want some sort of like authority to let you know, right? That you're talking to the person you're expecting to be talking to. So encrypted email does a good job for what it's trying to do, right? It's trying to make sure we can get these long messages that we're not going to send back to back to back, right? We're going to send one email, we're going to wait for a while for an email response, and then we're going to send another email back. We don't often kind of send 5 emails in a row. At least that's not kind of like the average use case for email. So it does a good job in that realm. And you know, say every month we update our key pair, then that helps us a little bit with like, you know, every month our messages are now secret again to somebody who might have compromised us a month ago. So, okay, that's encrypted email. So what do we want that is not encrypted email? We want text messaging, right? So first, maybe let's see how text messaging currently works, right? So the way that text messaging currently works is something like this, where we have, you know, you have your phone. If you're sending a message over SMS, then the message when it's sent to your nearest tower is going to be encrypted. And then when it's sent over to the person, so here we have Alice and Bob, let's say, again. And then when the message gets over to Bob again, we're also going to have it be encrypted. So we're going to have another, you know, encrypted message here. But importantly, here the message is not encrypted. So we're doing something, right? There's some sort of somebody that's just sitting, tapping your wire may not exactly be able to get your messages. But they can, right? Very easily if they kind of just eavesdrop here. So that kind of is bad. And what we're going to try to do is upgrade from that for people that want more secrecy for their messages, right? This is not necessarily for everything. You may be okay with some messages being sent over in this way, but eventually you're not going to be okay with everything being sent this way. And so that's why we're going to do something a little bit more complicated. Before we talk about what we're going to do that's more complicated, let's talk for a minute about what compromise means, right? So what is compromise? In this situation here, we're going to talk about compromise of Alice and compromise of Bob. So we're going to assume that there's two people, they're texting, and any one of their phones could be completely compromised. So everything that's known to your phone will be known to the attacker. That's what we're going to mean by compromise. So, and that's what we're going to call state. So full state compromise. That's what compromise is going to be. And the way that Signal is going to help get you security, you know, after you've been compromised, and security for everything before you were compromised, that's all going to be through key management. So this isn't an actual term that anybody uses, pre-compromise, but I think it kind of helps a little bit. And then we have post-compromise security, which is what we also call healing. And the way that we're going to achieve these things are through key management. So you're going to have to think a lot more carefully about how often keys are updated, who the updated keys are known to. Yeah. No, no, I don't know. I know that it's not encrypted currently, but I don't know why exactly it's not encrypted. Also, I mean, the important thing, honestly, to notice here is the fact that even if the message is encrypted to the cell tower, who is the message encrypted to, right? So the message here is encrypted to the cell tower is the recipient. And then again, here, you're going to have the message, you know, from the cell tower encrypted to the phone, which is not actually helpful. It doesn't provide us what we now call end-to-end encryption, right? This is why that phrase came up of end-to-end encryption. We want these cell towers to not be able to tell what our message is. So even if the cell tower kind of, so say we're not even eavesdropping, right? We're in a different situation. Somebody just hacks the cell tower. You have no control over this, but the cell tower, or, you know, like the provider essentially that's giving you this, right? Property of being able to SMS your friends, if they get hacked, then your messages are compromised. They're just kind of stored. So, you know, if they haven't been deleted, they're just there for people to see. And what you want is, you know, when I delete a message from my phone, it should kind of be gone for, you know, all intents and purposes, unless the person that I'm messaging hasn't deleted the message, right? That's fine. But once both of us have been careful enough to delete our messages, they should really be gone. And that's what you want when you're doing secure messaging, right? Is you want to make sure that there's really what you want to make sure is that the security that we're getting matches our intuition for the security we might want to get. Did you have a question? Okay. That's a great question though. Yeah, it's interesting, but we like a lot of the secure communication stuff that we have now, it's less prevalent than we think, right? Not everybody uses almost nobody uses encrypted email, right? There's very few people also using Signal. It went up quite a bit once people realized some of the problems with the other messaging apps, which came up due to resistance efforts. But most of the time, like people are okay with this, right? Once you start thinking about wanting your communication to be encrypted or to be more secret, that you start thinking about this. Sometimes it can be too late, but so we want an easy way to do this. We want people to feel like they can do this even before they need, they might be afraid that, say, their country might persecute them for something that they've said to friends, right? So when I was in high school, I said a lot of things about the Indian government over text message that, maybe if the government found that, they wouldn't be so happy. But if it was over Signal, then I'd have some sense of security for those messages. Okay, so the things that we're going to want here, these are the names for them. Forward secrecy is one of the things that we want. The name of this property is a little bit obtuse, like it really doesn't help. Or I guess not obtuse, but opaque. It doesn't help us figure out what it's doing. But what we actually want is when we send messages now, we want them to be secure in the future. If we are not compromised right now, then anything we sent right now should not be compromised, right? This makes sense intuitively. Really difficult to get when we're in kind of an asynchronous setting and messages can be sent quickly back to back. You would get kind of irritated if you were trying to text somebody and it was like a few minutes of lag before you got their messages, and then sometimes your messages didn't send because actually they were trying to send you a message, right? This would be frustrating. So the asynchronous is really a very important piece to deal with. And this is a thing that, maybe gets shoved under the rug a little bit when we talk about, secure protocols, but usability is an important part of security, right? Security, like a security definition, includes correctness, right? That's one of the usability concerns we have. We want to know that when we use something, we can guarantee that if it works, it really works. We also, in this situation, we want to be able to decrypt messages immediately. We want to be able to communicate over a channel that's not totally reliable. You might have, well, even if it is reliable, it's not totally synchronous. You might get message 4 before you get message 3, right? I'm sure you've seen this when you're texting, right? You get a message, but one of the previous messages is still loading. You haven't received it. And you want to be able to still get that 4th message, right? This is all part of the functionality that we're trying to provide. That's another buzzword that gets thrown around a lot in cryptography. But the reason why we say functionality is because it's not just input-output behavior, right? There's a lot of other guarantees you want to have. Okay, so for forward secrecy, we want to protect messages that were sent before compromise. And we just spoke about, what that means, which is that deletion should be meaningful. When we delete messages, that should mean something. And so just to, create a picture, we have, I don't know, some sort of time frame. And you're talking to a friend this entire time. So we're talking back and forth, and what we want is that once we have a compromise occur, that doesn't kind of change the fact that, so say we got compromised somewhere here for some reason, right? Say we clicked on the wrong email or whatever. There was a compromise here. Somehow somebody managed to get control of our device. They managed to see the entire state of our device, right? So if you hadn't deleted these messages, right? This is also something that sometimes we forget, or I do anyway, used to. I've thought about it more recently, so maybe I don't anymore. But if these messages are still on our phone, right, then that's going to be a problem. If the messages are still on our phone, when the phone is compromised right here, so when the phone is compromised right here, one of the things that's going to happen is that everything that was on my phone is compromised. So if I haven't deleted my text conversation, it's still there. The attacker can read it. This is just going to be true, right? If you're going to store your messages in the cloud, they're going to be there for an attacker to read. This is another thing that's going to be true. This is important for you to know. Sometimes I've had my friends tell me, I use Signal. Also, I back up all my messages to the cloud. Okay, that's great. But any messages that are getting backed up to the cloud, those aren't secure anymore because you're not deleting them. So you're not going to have this forward secrecy property that you might get otherwise. At least like the way that the iCloud backups work. I don't know about, all types of backups. I will not say anything about that. Yes, go for it.
So Signal has a feature like backup cloud.
I don't think Signal specifically does. iMessage definitely does. Yeah, what were you saying? WhatsApp does? That makes sense. That makes sense. In general, if a messaging service tells you like, do you want to back up your messages to the cloud? They're also saying, hey, do you want your messages to just be stored forever? Which means that deletion, like you're not deleting. So it doesn't mean anything. You're not getting security in the future. Unfortunately, one of my professors recently faced the problem where, he's very secure. He makes sure all his messages, none of them are getting backed up to the cloud. He rebooted he reset one of his machines on accident, lost all of his conversations with everyone, including all of the research messages that he had sent back and forth. So that can suck sometimes. But it's kind of, you're weighing the pros and cons, right? You're figuring out which things you really want. Where there are certain conversations that I might not mind being on the internet forever, right? Like this lecture, I don't mind being on the internet forever. My messages with my mom, maybe not so much. Okay, so this is what we mean by forward secrecy. Yeah, I was referring to WhatsApp more and iMessage when I was talking about backing up to the cloud. This is what we want. We want protect messages that we sent before compromise. So as long as we've deleted these messages, right? So let me write that down on the slides so you guys have it later if you want to look at the slides. If these were deleted, do we get this property with encrypted email? No, yeah, we don't get this property with encrypted email. And we may not necessarily want that property with encrypted email. We may not necessarily want that property with encrypted email. We could also use things on top of encrypted email, but if you just use encrypted email as is, you're not getting this property. Phones, if you're using Signal, you might. And then let's see. Right, there's a couple other things, right? There was post-compromise security, which is something like this, right? But what we're saying is, if you're compromised for a period of time, maybe we can just grab this picture. Let's do that. Right. So post-compromise. So we'll just get this picture back again. And what's happening for post-compromise security is that instead of thinking about before compromise, we're going to do exactly what the name says and worry about what happens after we are compromised. So say that one thing that would be really nice if we could get it would be, say we're compromised till this point, right? We want to know that all of this can still be secure. So as long as the attacker can't kind of maintain their compromise, as long as they can't read the state on our phone constantly, we want to heal somehow from the compromise. And it would be really nice to say the instant the attacker leaves, we get this healing, right? With Signal, we don't get that instantly, but we do get pretty close. So we get this as soon as you can send a message back and forth. So you can send a message to your friend and your friend can respond to you. We're done. We know that every message after that point is secure. So that's pretty nice. And there's still, Signal's protocol isn't perfect. It turns out, you'd think secure messaging seems simple. It's, we should be able to get this by now. We've got really complicated protocols for stuff like zero knowledge proofs. So why don't we have secure messaging? Well, the usability concerns really make providing the security concerns really difficult. So we don't have something perfect yet, but Signal is kind of like the closest we've gotten heuristically to what we want. Okay, so that's forward secrecy and post-compromise security. Post-compromise security we'll worry about next time. So next lecture, I'll introduce what KDFs are, and then I'll talk a little bit more about post-compromise security. For this lecture, we'll just focus on kind of like the more basic case, where we think of a KDF just as something where you can compute forwards, but you can't go backwards. And you can see how that might help with something like forward secrecy. So let's see what's next. Right, okay. I'll write this a lot more neatly. So what we're going to use as a building block is just consider a box that's just a one-way function. So this is a one-way function. Let's actually just call it a KDF so that there's less confusion later. Often, the things that we're using heuristically for getting this sort of security is a KDF, because we're often using the HMAC and HKDF constructions by Ratchet, and those have the properties that we want. That's what Signal uses. The properties that we're looking for today for forward secrecy. So this is a forward secrecy building block. Oh, I believe there's an L in there. Okay, so this is a forward secrecy building block. And the first thing we want is that, or we have, right? These are assumptions we're going to make is, okay. So we have keys and we have output. And another thing that we're going to have later, but we're not really going to talk about today, is we're actually going to have some sort of input to the KDF as well. And this is what we're going to use later for post-compromise security. Right now, we won't worry about that. Assume it's just some string, right? So assume it's all zeros. Okay, that I've heard is confusing notation. I will write this in less confusing notation. Right, that's hopefully slightly better. One sec, my AirPods just died. As input, and then we have some sort of output. And what we want is that this output looks random to somebody who doesn't know the key. If the key is random or unknown and unknown, then the output is random. So output looks random to an attacker who doesn't know the key. Another thing we're going to have, and this is where, the forward secrecy is going to kick in, is we're actually going to take this output and we're not just going to use it as is. The output's going to be, long enough. It's going to be longer than the key. And we're going to split it up. So we're going to take this output and turn it into two outputs. We're going to get a key prime and we're going to get an output. And then we put that key prime back into the KDF. And this is what we call a KDF chain. What we're doing is we're just taking the KDF, and we know that the output is going to look random to somebody who doesn't know the key, right? And we're going to use that, and we're going to put half the output right back into the KDF. And this way we can keep generating outputs, right? And this is going to be important. This is what we're going to end up using eventually in Signal to encrypt our messages. But we want something stronger from this future output, right? Trying to write this slightly neater so that you guys can read the slides later. So the second property that we're going to have is that the past outputs are random, right? So we want our current messages to be protected from compromise in the future. So past outputs look random to an attacker who doesn't know the key. And so what do we mean by that? Say that this key prime that we have gets compromised. So even if we have this one be compromised, if this was already deleted, and then if this was already deleted, then an attacker who compromises the party here is not going to be able to tell anything about what this output should look like, right? And so what we mean by looks random goes back to the indistinguishability game. I don't know if you guys remember this from the crypto review, but if you don't, just go back and look at the notes. I know it's a little bit painful at this point in the semester because you guys are all very busy, but it will help you. It'll speed things up overall for Signal. But whenever we say looks random, is what we mean is indistinguishable from random. And just as a quick reminder, the indistinguishability game is one where essentially I will hand you, say this attacker knows key prime, right? The attacker knows this key prime. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand the attacker either this output or some completely random string. What it means for the output to look random is the attacker can't even guess with like any probability better than random guessing, which is which. So the attacker learns nothing about the output, right? It can't even tell, oh, if it ends in 0, then I'm going to say it's the output. Because if you got even that level of information, then when you're seeing all of these completely random keys, about half of them should end in 1. And so you're going to get a probability better than half of guessing. Because every single time you actually see the output, you're going to say yes. So, your error is only in the case, like half the time that you say yes, it's not the output, but you do identify every single output if you could tell, 1 bit of the output. Yeah.
What was the first input? Is it zeros in the chain?
Oh, so this input, right? So all of the inputs we're going to assume are just zeros in the chain for this class. Later on, we can have other inputs to the chain, but right now what we'll assume is you're always going to have just some fixed string. So let zeros be the fixed string that we choose. So, and then we're just going to input that every time.
Okay, so what makes it different is the key.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Right now, we're just going to worry about the key. I'm putting the input in here because notationally it'll come up later. So just so that everybody remembers, there's 2 things that go into the KDF. Yeah. Pull this down. Okay. So we're going to have something like this. And as we just discussed, we have some K, and then maybe we get some K prime, K double prime. This is some secret key that we start the KDF with, right? So this is, before we go into secure messaging protocols, we're just seeing what happens with a KDF chain at all.
Okay.
So we assume that the attacker, doesn't know some key, and it's getting the output of the KDF chain on that key. Then that output is going to look indistinguishable from a random string.
Okay.
So that's the first property that we have. And then we're going to have another property for when we have compromise in the future. So we have some outputs. And so now assume that here is where compromise happens. Or even here is where compromise happens. Okay, so when we have this compromise, we want that everything that we've deleted so far, so we've deleted all of this. We want that all of this is kind of safe now, right? And we have that property. So even if you know K double prime, you're not going to be able to tell what output 1 and output 2 are. And a much stronger property than that, they're going to be indistinguishable from random. And so these are the two properties we're going to worry about for the KDF for today. Initially, if you don't know K, so this is, we don't, or I'm going to say the attacker doesn't know. The attacker doesn't know K, right? So property 1 is that output 1 is indistinguishable from random. Let's call the attacker A. So for A. And then we're going to have a second property as well. And now, before we even talk about what the second property is the attacker, we just said that the attacker compromised the party right here, right? So it knows K double prime. It doesn't know anything that was deleted before. We don't know what the properties are for those. Can it tell what output 3 is? Is output 3 compromised?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that clear why output 3 would be compromised? Because output 3 is completely determined by this key and this string, both of which are now known variables to the attacker. The KDF itself, it has properties, but it's a completely known public function, right? This is how every single one of us can be using the exact same KDF when we talk using Signal. And the security properties apply even when that is true, right? This goes back to Kirchhoff's principle of the actual protocol that you're using to get security should be public. You shouldn't rely on the secrecy of the protocol, only the secrecy of the key. So when we actually get compromised at this step, we're going to compromise all of this stuff that's happening after that step. So that sucks. We're going to need to do something else for post-compromise security, clearly, because this doesn't give us healing, right? That's where the inputs are going to come in. When we bury the inputs, that's helpful for post-compromise security. But for now, one very nice property that we do have is that if you get compromised at this step, so you get compromised here, everything before is secure. So, so output 1 and output 2, well, we will say look random to A, right? Even after compromise. And so the KDF in some sense has forward secrecy. And this kind of gives away kind of the plot of what's going to happen, right? We're going to use this KDF to get forward secrecy. does this mean we're completely done? And at this point, we can, pack our bags and say, we have a protocol that gives us forward secrecy, and we can use it in an asynchronous setting to get messaging. Not exactly, right? Because how do you make sure that I can get message 3 and then get message 1? If, I delete the keys for messages 1 and 2, then I'm in trouble. So this is not, it doesn't right out the bat give us the protocol that we want. There's still some kind of concerns to figure out to make sure that we can work in an asynchronous environment. All right. So let's start by kind of writing the basic protocol that we would have. Let me delete these slides, maybe. That'll help. How much time do we have left? Does anybody? 45 minutes? 25 minutes. That makes sense. Okay. I was like, 45 seems like a long time. Okay. Sorry for scaring everyone. Thank you, Eric. Okay. So we've spoken a little bit about the KDF. Let's just quickly write out the first protocol we might think of using this KDF, and then talk a little bit about why that doesn't work. And then we'll end class, and next time we'll kind of finish up on how we're getting forward secrecy from the KDF, and hopefully start on post-compromise security, but maybe not. Okay, so we have the sender here, we have the receiver here. And we're going to imagine that this sort of a messaging chain works for one pair of sender and receiver. So if you're two people talking to each other, we're actually going to use 2 copies of this protocol that we're writing out now. Once we figure out the kinks, right? So we have a KDF. Okay, so we have a KDF, and we know that we can chain them and get this forward secrecy property. So assume that Alice and Bob are sharing some key, right? The sender and the receiver are sharing some key that they both know that's secret to everybody else at the moment. Right, so this is going to be some secret key. Okay. And then we know that we get these outputs. So we know that we get, and I'm going to call them message keys. So message key 1, message key 2, message key 3. Same thing here. Oh, not right from the KDF. We're going to get message key 1, and so on and so forth. Right? And maybe we can name the keys that we're getting here as well. So we call them K1, K2, K3. So now we say that, we'll send messages back and forth between the sender and the, not back and forth, but the sender will keep sending messages to the, yeah, go for it.
So if it's like the entire scheme, don't you have the KDF used here as a PRF with the key as input?
We can. As long as you remember the 2 properties that I was talking about before. The reason why this will become slightly more complicated later is we're going to have now KDFs have both an input and a key. So the thing that's hidden that we're not talking about today is there's this fixed string input that we're putting in here right now. And that's just, we're ignoring that today because we're saying it's a fixed public string. But the way that Signal works is for part of its protocol, it actually varies that string to get healing from compromise. And the thing that the KDF has that the PRF doesn't, right? It's the PRF is, if you don't know the key, then the outputs look completely random, right? They look like the outputs of a completely random function. With a KDF, you can vary either the key, right? That keys say, like the key will restrict you to some set of outputs, But then you can also vary the inputs, and that will restrict you to some set of outputs. In a KDF, the way you want to think about it is both of these things are going to cause randomness on the output. And so if you have inputs that are unknown, even if you knew the key, the outputs are going to look random. And that doesn't mean that you can't think about it as a PRF. Sometimes it just helps to kind of, there's different formalisms, sometimes even when we use the same protocol for two different things, because it allows us to focus in on the properties that we want, in this particular situation.
The first step is KDF as a PRF with two outputs. The first one's going to be a key. It's going to use the other part of the input as a key to the next iteration.
You can think of the KDF as a PRF with two outputs. Yeah, I mean, it's a long output, right, that we're just splitting in half. So you can think of it like a PRF.
Or
yeah.
It's actually a PRF, just like a block cipher, like a block PRF.
Like I said, you can go ahead. You can think of this as a PRF, but the reason why we abstract out to calling it a KDF is because we may not always use everything that's a PRF may not be a KDF. Everything that's a KDF may not be a PRF. In practice, some of these protocols that we use are similar or sometimes the same, but that doesn't mean that one gives you the other, right? The actual security guarantees one might be stronger than the other. So the security guarantees might be incomparable. So while you can make these analogies and they can be really helpful for thinking intuitively, think specifically about which properties I'm claiming from the KDF, especially when, we talk about what attacks can you make on this protocol that uses this building block, right? It's like, well, think about what properties I'm claiming for the building block. Don't just kind of think of the intuitive notion that we gave you. The intuitive notion is a good starting point, but eventually when you're making your case, the properties come into play, especially when you have kind of more nuanced attacks. And this happens even with kind of usability, right? So one of the things that's really important for attacks, right, for compromise of a protocol is whether or not you're deleting keys. This isn't always specified in a protocol, right? But anybody who kind of has thought about attacks on protocols before in real life knows that, not deleting keys will lead to attacks. So it's important that when we're asking for certain properties, we might, some might require you to delete the keys, some might not. So even if they're heuristically the same, they can be different. I hope that's a little bit helpful at least. Yeah. Okay, so we have this might be let's go back to the kind of basic protocol that we were outlining. So we might have one where we use the KDF chain to get all this string of keys or this kind of stream of keys, and then you just use them to encrypt your messages one after the other. And what is the receiver going to do when it receives messages asynchronously, right? So say that it receives message 3 first, right? It wants to be able to decrypt message 3. So it'll go forward, it'll compute, it'll compute these things, it'll get message key 3. And it'll decrypt the message, right? It'll get the ciphertext, and then it'll decrypt the message under message key 3, and it'll get the ciphertext that we're looking for. It'll decrypt the ciphertext to get the message that we're looking for. Sorry about that. And then what does it do? It knows there are 2 messages that are remaining, right? So maybe ciphertext 3 comes with some sort of label, right? It says, I'm the 3rd ciphertext. So we know there's 2 ciphertexts remaining. Maybe we just wait, right? We say, okay, we've decrypted message 3. We just wait for 1 and 2 before we delete the keys entirely. This seems okay, right? It gives us something. It gives us this immediate decryption property for sure, right? When you get a message, you can go ahead and decrypt it. We know that once we've received all 3 of these messages, we'll be able to delete all the keys, and then we get forward secrecy, right? Because we know the KDF has forward secrecy. The problem, though, is what happens when somebody drops this message, right? So what if somebody drops this message? So this message is never received. That's impossible to read. I will fix that. If this message is never received, we'll always keep around this secret key, and all of our messages forever, as long as we're using the secret key, are compromised. That's bad. We don't want that. Signal does manage to get around that, but this should kind of demonstrate why it's not, why Signal's protocol might be complicated, right? Like so far, we're not talking about messaging back and forth. We're not talking about post-compromise security. We have this KDF, we have some very nice properties from it, and we want to get I want to be able to send messages to somebody, and I just want forward secrecy. I just want to be able to send them messages repeatedly and get forward secrecy. That is not quite trivial because you're going to have to think about how to combine this immediate decryption in this, like, so why is immediate decryption? So I didn't actually really talk about this. Like, why am I talking about message 3 arriving before message 1, right? This isn't a security property necessarily, but it's a security property in a setting, right? And that setting is an asynchronous setting. So the messages that we're receiving are over an asynchronous network. Messages may not arrive in order. Some messages might get jammed somewhere. Not all messages will take the same route, right? This is very important. Not always accounted for in all protocols that we might see. So when you look at a protocol and you're thinking, where can I use this? Can I use this protocol here? You want to think about what setting am I in, right? Is the protocol assuming that my messages arrive immediately? One of the important things that comes up for something like secure messaging is my protocol assuming that both people are online at the same time, right? Every time my mom lives in India, right? Every time I message her, she's not online, right? She's only online some of the time when I'm messaging her. So if my messaging protocol relied on us doing a key exchange every time we started talking, I could never message her when she was offline. And so protocols are only so helpful, they're helpful when you know how to use them properly. So, don't roll your own crypto is one of the, lessons you might get out of this class. Another lesson you might get is like, even if a protocol, seems strong enough, the strong enough doesn't mean anything unless you think about in what setting that protocol has guarantees, right? Who knows what? What do you mean by compromise? So sometimes when people talk about compromise in a setting like this, they might say, oh, when my phone is compromised, you can see my message keys, but you're not going to get the long-term keys that I use to start my Signal conversation, right? This is fine. We have, certain parts of our computers that are harder to break into than other parts. But if you're in a setting where you're not using a machine that provides that, then a protocol that assumes that sort of compromise may not be the one that you want. So setting matters. Turns out in this situation that we spoke about right here, let me know also if anything so far is confusing. I'm happy to go back over things, and I'll put up these notes online. Yeah, so in this thing is a lot easier to fix. What do we do when we receive ciphertext 3, right? We compute message key 3, and we decrypt the ciphertext, and we just kind of start a dictionary. And then we say, for message 1, we have key 1, and for message 2, we have key 2. These are the messages we're going to use. These are the keys we're going to use for decryption. And then we can go ahead and delete all this, right? And so we're going to get our forward secrecy. We're also going to get our immediate decryption. When you get message 2, just go look in the dictionary, decrypt your message, and then delete the entry in the dictionary. Does that kind of make sense why we would be doing things that way? So now, even if we drop this message, right, say that message 1 never arrives as before. So in this case, the crucial difference between what we discussed before and what we're discussing now is that even if ciphertext 1 never arrives, you're still going to get post-compromise security. And this is a very important building block for Signal. I'm gonna, like end the lecture very soon. I'll just tell you a little bit about what we'll do next time. But this is what Signal calls its symmetric ratchet. What I'm going to do instead of Thursday Lab is I'll put up some notes on, Signal's actual symmetric ratchet. I'll put up a little bit of information about what I spoke about today, and maybe you can go over that to just get like that second refresher. But this is kind of essentially how Signal's symmetric ratchet works. And Signal's protocol has 3 pieces. It has the symmetric ratchet for you to send messages, the symmetric ratchet for you to receive messages, and then it also has this asymmetric ratchet, which is more complicated. The asymmetric ratchet is what gives you the symmetric ratchets. This asymmetric ratchet is the crucial component for post-compromise security. So this is why signal protocol is more complicated, is not only do we have one KDF chain, but each person's using 3 KDF chains that you're sharing with the other person. So every time you start a signal conversation, you have 3 KDF chains that you're using with the other person for that conversation. But yeah, it's a pretty neat idea if you think about it, right? It's hard to fix these problems, but there's a fix here that we have. All right, let me see if there's anything that I'm missing that I wanted to say. Right, awesome. No, I think that's it for today's lecture. Thank you very much. Next time we'll do more on KDFs and post-compromise security. Have a nice day, y'all.
Good luck.